Hello, everyone. Welcome to Humanology on Air. I'm Josiah.
I'm Jeeves.
And this episode is all about overcoming marketing obstacles. But before we get there, we always like to ask a bit of a silly question. This one is it's what I'm longing for, your summer holiday. What is your summer holiday? Where are you going? Maybe how long? If you're like doing a 3-weeker, that would be amazing to see in the chat. So just get engaged, write down where are you going.
Where are you going to
Jeeves?
go? What are you not going to do? What are you going to do? What are you not going to do? Me, that's a big part of my vacations is not doing a whole lot.
And where are you going?
I'm going to go to my friend's cottage. I go every summer. It's not my cottage. I don't pay for it. Make rich friends, everyone. Anyway, it's going to be great. Really looking forward to it. That's in August.
I am also going north. That
Nice.
is my, getaway. Yes, that is where I like to go, north.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
awesome.
Cottage.
Tell us where you're going to go. And while you're doing that, let me just tell you that today we're going to talk about 3 major obstacles. We're going to talk about executive buy-in or buy-in of any kind. We're going to talk about working with other departments, specifically legal, but I think the advice applies pretty broadly to sales, product manager, like other people that sort of have influence over what we do as marketers. And then finally, we have an idea for trying to get more out of your marketing budget and seeing if you can sort of reallocate and things like that. So let's do it.
Great. Let's go.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So this segment is all about trying to get buy-in. I find it challenging when you're in a marketing department, you're trying to get a project or a campaign moving, and then you're trying to get buy-in up the chain, whether that's C-level, executive, or a board. You've been a part of a lot of boards. You've been C-suite for a long time. Like, how do we as marketers speak to executives and get buy-in for these, what we think are great ideas? Like, how do we make some progress? What insight can you share with us to help us make progress?
Sure. So from a CEO perspective, if
Yeah.
I put my CEO hat on, what are the things I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about, is this marketing campaign aligned with our core purpose? Does it support our strategic vision? Is it consistent with our culture and our values? And so those are the things that I'm immediately thinking about. More broadly, if I think about my CEO peers, they would also be thinking about what their key stakeholders are thinking about, what their board is thinking about, and then there's a lot of overlap, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of overlapping concerns from a board perspective. I think let's just step back a little bit and think about what the role of the board is. So we often hear the phrase "noses in, fingers out." And so what does that mean? That means that the role of the board is to provide oversight, insight, and foresight by asking great questions without getting into and guiding, without getting into the day-to-day management of the business. So generally, a board wouldn't be responsible for approving a campaign, but, and there's a big but, they are very invested in this because, and it's important for us to get the board on board because, the role of the board is one of the major roles of the board is to manage risk and mitigate risk. And obviously brand and company reputation is a big part of that. So when I think about this session, which is about overcoming old obstacles, we kind of, we think of obstacles as a bit of a nuisance, but I would invite us to think about it differently and say they're there for a very real reason, and they have an important role to play. So let's be aware of that.
And you didn't even mention like money, or it's interesting to me, and I wonder, how does the weighting change on some of these factors? So are there times when perhaps there's more risk averse versus being able to take on more risk Is that maybe influenced by economic factors? Like, how do you think about the weighting of some of these kind of, I guess, variables that are considered? Any thoughts?
Yeah, in my experience at the ELT level and at the board level, people aren't talking about, budget. They're not talking about the cost. They're talking about risk. And I'll give you, a quick. So your question was, when does that change? Well, context is really important, right? And so quick example of something where the context is important. 2021, Volkswagen launched this little April Fool's Day campaign, and it resulted in an SEC investigation to determine whether or not they were breaking the law by artificially inflating stock prices. Like, that's a big deal.
Yes.
Right? Really big deal.
Yes.
And so context is important because that happened on the heels of, a few years after the whole Dieselgate scandal,
right,
where they were fudging numbers. So, that's the context that the board and the ELT are looking at. So it's really not, to me, a conversation about budget. It's risk management.
Yeah. And timing matters. Mm-hmm. Timing does matter.
Yeah.
It's really, really insightful. So what about timing? Like, I know some boards meet, do they meet every month or every quarter? For our marketers that are in the field, like, help us understand, like, how often do boards meet and make decisions, or even C-suite? Like, how often are you actually making a decision? Is it like every day, or does that timing matter, or not really? Like, let's just bring it to C-suite, and they'll bring it to the board if it's a big thing that needs kind of foresight, insight, considerations.
Yeah, so I think it's a question. It depends on whether or not we're looking for the board to provide, whether we just want to provide information to the board, because then the timing doesn't matter. We'll line it up with the cadence of the meetings, or whether we actually need the board to opine on this and provide a perspective and be part of that risk conversation. And I would say that would only happen if it's a high-level strategic brand decision, because brand reputation is a core area of responsibility for the board. Right.
And one thing I heard from you is, in order to maybe frame ideas or frame campaigns in the right way, we do need a deep understanding of our own purpose and our culture and a bit of our vision and where are we going. Like, we need to be thinking more than just about, is this going to make an impact in the next 30 days or help hit our numbers? Like, in order to align with executives, they're thinking about the future and they're thinking about different things. So we've got to kind of talk their language. This is what I hear?
100%. And if I think about, and this is advice for all marketers as well as us, I would really invite us to put the frame of, put the hat on and understand that, we should expect objections and we should expect there to be obstacles. And, it is our job to anticipate those, to understand them, to provide a point of view on them. And don't wait for ELT and board to poke holes in a campaign. Let's get in front of it. Do the work, understand what the potential risks are, and provide a point of view on that. I think it's naive for us to think that our only job is to come up with a great idea.
Right.
We don't live in that world anymore. It is also our job to identify, to understand, and to address potential risks, right?
That's great. Super helpful. Anything else you want to leave with us in this segment?
Final thought,
Yes.
the old adage that, there's no such thing as bad publicity doesn't exist anymore. And that is very top of mind for boards and ELT. So I think if you are putting forward and I understand that we want breakthrough ideas. We want to be provocative. We have to also understand that perspective and help boards and ELTs wrestle through that. They also want to drive a great ROI. They want great results, and they understand that nothing is without risk, but we have to collaborate on that.
Amazing. We debunked an old myth here on this segment, so thank you, Chantal, for joining us and sharing your insight.
All right. That was a really great segment with Chantel. I really liked it.
Me too.
I was listening in the back. And something that stood out to me was how Chantel was talking about risk and how there's always risk. And this is sort of perfect because we're about to talk about working with legal. But I was thinking about creative risk. And I was talking with one of our senior copywriters, Carolina, and she was saying when she presents kind of edgy, creative, she does it by starting with the safest, most approachable creative, and then throughout her presentation, she gets slowly more and more out there, I guess. And she does this for a reason, and the reason is actually around risk, but it's risk from a marketing creative perspective. And so listening to Chantel, I was like, yes, we have to think about the lens on risk from a leadership board, executive level. But then I was also thinking about what Carolina was saying, because I was like, yeah, from a creative perspective, not breaking through, not pushing our boundaries is a creative risk. And we're measured by, various things, awareness, impressions, click-through rates, all of the things. And I was just thinking, listening to Chantel and thinking about how we have to balance those things, and how I'm like, okay, I think moving forward, it might be helpful for me personally to acknowledge that risk right up front and to say okay, I'm going to try to do a better job putting on the executive risk hat, but then also sharing with the executives hey, this is my risk hat. My risk hat is I'm worried that if we aren't breaking through, the risk is people will forget and they'll move on, and we won't stand out at all. And all of this work and all of this budget that you've spent on marketing is actually just kind of for nothing, because it's not doing the thing that it needs to do to stand out and get attention.
And one of the things that stood out to me in that conversation with Chantel is, I think C-level and boards are thinking about risk against the 3-year, the 5-year, the 10-year horizon, right? They're thinking about is this going to edge us closer towards the objectives we've set as an organization, or will this potentially put us off that track? And I think we have to, as marketers, inherit this thinking around, okay, what risk mitigation is happening at a C level, at an executive level? How do we think about it and incorporate some of the thinking around it? Because certainly if an organization is looking to move towards a deeper purpose and meaning and empathy for their culture and all these different things, we've got to just factor all these kind of concepts into it and make sure that. So I appreciate the kind of creative risk. There's risk in not being risky.
Yeah.
And then also, are we going to kind of throw us off this longer term vision? So very cool. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Great chat.
Let's talk about legal departments and working with departments in general that aren't necessarily executive departments, just sort of the departments that need to come on side and vice versa. When we are just trying to get marketing out the door. And I want to talk about legal because I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find a marketer who hasn't sort of had a nice little run-in with legal.
I feel sad because I just have a disposition that I don't like legal. It's right. And it's what's my problem? And that's why I like this segment coming up, because it unpacks that, why is that? And how do we not be on that side? Because it makes zero sense. We can work together.
It is interesting because I'm kind of with you. I've always sort of had this they just represent an institution of no to me. And that's why I don't like them. I don't like being told no. So I interviewed my friend, Jason Rhino. He works at RBC Wealth Management. It is a very litigious environment at a bank, as I'm sure you can appreciate. He is a journey design lead. What is that? He's a writer by trade. So he produces a lot of content for that website, but he also, it's UX, and he manages designers. So on one hand, he sort of has this creative hat on, but then he also has he's managing a team and he needs to get things out the door. He's managing a lot of stakeholders. So I interviewed him, and I want to tell you about how this interview went. We will show some of the clips. It was over Zoom. It's a little choppy, so manage expectations. But he said two things to me. He was like, there's a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. He has advice if you're up against the ropes in the worst case scenario. But he's like, in the best case scenario, you're never up against the ropes.
Here's where I try not to get to, and it's one question. And it is this: what is the legal risk? If they're making the sentence all unintelligible, and if I feel on behalf of the person, for us at RBC, the client who's reading it, or in some cases the advisor who has to use this system that I'm writing in, if I think it's going to make it unintelligible and bad, I will go to that. And if they're pushing back, and I will say, what's the legal risk? Are they just being writers and having an opinion through their legal lens? Or is there an actual legal risk here? And so one, I get clarity on that. I always get a good thing. One, I get clarity. Two, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I guess none. And sometimes they're right, but it pushes the conversation a little bit more. Three, I learn about legal things.
I think just that in and of itself was enough for me to say, to sort of challenge ourselves, challenge the audience to say, like, when you get a no, you can ask why, and you can try, you can make a case, or you can,
It's great.
You can stand up for your work, and sometimes that means a negotiation or making sacrifices, but sometimes you can actually push the work that you originally did through, maybe with some concessions, but just by asking why, you might be able to actually get what you want done. So there was that.
But you should try to not be up against the wall, right? Like,
yes.
That's not ideal scenario, or the scenario that's being kind of recommended to go down or end up in.
Like, there's this air of like, oh, legal. We gotta go to legal. And it's
I have that air.
It's not a monster. It's not a monster. These are people. They're normal people, right?
Sure.
And they want to contribute, and they want to be involved, and they have expertise.
Right.
So going to them more as subject matter experts rather than a review is where I've gotten our wins and made the process a lot easier. So even before I start, if it's really legal heavy or there might be some legal implications on it, I stop, call them up. Hey, this is what we're working on. So what's happening? Anything we got to look out for? And that's a casual conversation. And what you're doing there is, one, you're creating a relationship, but two, you're saving yourself time instead of getting into, writing, designing, putting the whole thing together, and then going to legal review, and then them going like, oh, you can't do that whole thing right there. It sucks. And I hated that, right? The other thing I noticed too on their side, let's talk about empathy a little bit, Jen, is on their side, one of my first experiences at RBC was people had that attitude towards them. And they kind of avoided them, and they saved it to the last minute. And then they tasked me with going to legal with all this stuff. And then like all the people who are running this program were like, peace, I got to go. I'm on vacation or whatever. It was like right around Christmas. And I was like, and it wasn't because like they trusted me to do this. They just didn't want to deal with legal.
Yeah.
In fact, they were sending me like tips on the side. Like, hey, if they say this, then you say no. And then like I felt kind of shoved towards them as if it was like some kind of big bully, right? Like, you go fight them. And what I realized is the amount of text that we were putting in front of them and the deadline we were asking for them to review, and they had zero context. They had no idea what was coming. If somebody did that to you or me, you'd be pissed, right? Hey, can you just write up this whole entire thing by 2 days from now? Thanks.
Right. Yeah. That is a fair comment.
Yeah. So that's where I've gone, and I've also had some bad meetings, but I will try to educate them. Hey, so when we're writing content in RBC, I have this whole spiel. This is about balance, and the legal stuff is important. This is where we need you. So I try to direct their eye.
Oh, okay.
But I have here my business. Here's what the business wants. Here's what the client or the people, this is what's important to them. I set it all up for them. And we have to maintain that balance. If we break that balance in the content, in the words, it's not going to work and be as strong. And that's how I explain it to them. And so I did a lot of pre-work on that on my early reviews when I came over to RBC Wealth Management to work with a new legal team. I put together little visuals for them to show them how it is. I put like, this is our voice. It's familiar, but professional. Like I put these little things together. So I gave them a little like
Primer.
5-10 minute training course. This is what we're aiming for, right?
Mhm.
This is where we want to be. And again, it took a lot of reaching out and again, just being a little bit more thoughtful for their job.
Yeah.
This happened to me a few months ago, actually, with some new legal people. They were like, the text was just doing this and this and growing and growing. And I had to go, so nobody's going to read this. And here's the science to back it up. So we have all the research and science that's just out there in the world. Just do a quick Google on what people read and don't read online. Chunks of text with all those kind of legal terms, run-on sentences that they tend to have with clauses in it, brackets, asterisks, maybe a little footnote here, whatever. It's just garbage. You can't even, your eye just doesn't know where to go, right? And so I had to bring that up. And what we're doing here is like, it's unintelligible. And so we need to find a way to trim this or to break this up somehow. And they got it. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. And so when I explained it in that way, and they're going to have a hard time reading this and consuming this information, that I know what you're telling me right now is very important, but it makes it really hard to read what you're doing to it. And therefore you're affecting cognition, right? So I drop science on them and all that sort of stuff. And this stuff is just out there. And so I use that in those conversations. And I use it not as a, haha, you're a piece of, you're no good. I use it as, hey, there's a bit of a risk when we start, again, I frame it in risk. So as we start layering more content and more words in here, you're diluting the meaning. And so you're actually increasing risk, right? By not being more thoughtful about how you present and word that very important message to them. So as they are messing with my content or adding content or doing things, I will go, you're increasing risk from a readability standpoint.
Right.
And often we've changed our approach to like quite a bit, where even at the project kickoff, we're inviting our legal in. And we run a workshop to get them to like call out potential risks, even if they don't really, nothing's really designed and put together yet or written, just the concept of it, they'll be able to get in front of it, right? So we get in front of those big things, and then we have an idea of how to handle that when we're actually doing our work. So if I know that this is something that we have to figure out, then I'll find a nice way to handle it that will be okay for the user or the client or whoever I'm talking to. And then legal will be okay with it because it'll show that I've thought about their concerns, right? So again, doing that pre-work, I think then when it comes down to like negotiating on the words or the little weird things, it's a lot easier at that point. Right. If you're in the corner, what's the legal risk? Will this get us sued? Just go hard.
Yeah.
Because you want clarity, right? And frame everything in risk.
And cost.
Okay. And ask why and why not. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be a little bit more informed, or you're actually, I've never actually had anything bad happen from asking that question, or we have a better conversation and a more robust conversation by asking that why or why not. Here's a big one. I totally forgot about it. It's like my number one rule all the time. It's not just for legal. I control the content. We control the content. I do not send things out cold. And I will walk you through that first. And I'm telling you my choices and my rationale. and why we're doing things. Because when I give that rationale and those choices, then they go, oh, okay, I get it. And then you have a much better discussion. But I do not let those decks go out cold at all.
Okay.
If you do that, then they have a runway
Yeah.
over it, and you cannot provide context for it. That's
Right.
very tactical, but I am telling you, it is like anytime I've seen new writers come in here, like, oh, I'll just fire off. I'll be like, no.
It's actually like amazing advice for also like getting buy-in from executives and like on the sales side and the project management side. It's like, no, always take. I think that's a really great piece of advice to end with. So I will do that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And can't wait to see you soon.
So this segment, we talked to Andy Patrick on our team, and we spoke to him specifically because a lot of his projects vary in size. So some projects within the digital experience team would be like a landing page or something that's fairly nominal cost. But then when you go into a large kind of change in a CRM system or a rebuild or a brand new website that is quite comprehensive, you can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think when we unpack this segment about budget, it's important to, and in a lot of our segments, run towards the objection, like run towards finance, unpack how they think about it. Because in finance, it's very common if you're looking at real estate deals that they're doing as capital expenditures, or if they're doing IT projects, a lot of these are amortized and depreciated over several number of years, sometimes up to 10 or even 25-year periods, because it doesn't make sense to make it an operating expense. And my argument when you get into these large capital builds is that they are not operating expenses for marketing to simply pay from their annual budget that they typically have for media and creative and different, like fitting it into there doesn't really make sense. So then what you have to do is go back and start speaking to these stakeholders about how you structure a more capital expenditure approach.
If we think about an operational expenditure, that's something like, marketing, keeping the lights on, like utilities and things like that. It's things that are intangibles and you pay for them. But if we think about like a capital expenditure is like a sales room, like an office, hardware, you're buying things that are like assets, right? So the real kind of crux of all of this is whether a website is a capital expenditure or an operational expenditure. So if you think about like capital expenditure being like an office that you bring people to and you sell to them and you generate leads and all that kind of stuff, a website is very much the same thing. Like a website somewhere that you drive people to, they come, they land, and they buy and they leave. Like that's a behavior now that has changed over time. It's not like the old days where you had the old websites where it was like, here, come and get our phone number and call us. We've all seen those ads where it's like they're waiting for dial-up and then it's a phone number that shows up. So that's kind of like the old way that websites were, and we've now got this new way that websites are, where it's like a place where, as I said, you can generate leads. So capital expenditure helps with that because it's a different pool of money. Like it's the things that you would use, it's the money that you would use for buying your hardware and like paying for an office or whatever. So if you think about capital expenditure doesn't cover all of it though. If you think about the stages in your building a website, like it covers things that you would generally do with when you're building like a sales room. Like it covers you planning the thing, like wireframe, site mapping and things like that. It's the same as you doing a floor plan for an office. Designing the thing, same as you designing an office, building the website, developing it, the same as you building with bricks and mortar an office as well. So all of those things can come out of your capital expenditure. Operational expenditure would be things like your strategy and like ongoing retainers and things like that.
Cool. So what I'm hearing is, as marketing leaders, it's not a terrible idea to sort of summarize how websites are different now and how we need to think about them differently, and then present to leadership, whatever that looks like in their context, just sort of a new perspective and a bid for, hey,
websites are different. They are assets. They need to do more for us. And as such, we need to pay for them differently and fund them differently. And
Yeah.
I think you said you have a way to help people with that. Like you developed the one pager, right?
Yeah, so we have a handy little one pager that we can link people to after this. It goes into all the legal bill that this matches up to, and the reason for it being positioned differently nowadays, and how you can explain that with your financial team, just to make sure it helps smooth the road so that you can find other money to pull from when you're paying for a website.
Yeah. And then use more marketing budget for other things that are actually probably better aligned with what marketing is meant to do.
Yeah.
Have you seen this work before?
Yes. So we have a current client, I can't say the name of, that we're actually working with, that we went through this same process. They got our one pager, they discussed it internally, and now they are pulling from different money when it comes to rebuilding their digital experience with us.
That's amazing. So there you go, people. It's possible. You can sort of reprioritize how things get funded and spent. And that's a one fresh idea for maybe getting a little bit more out of your marketing budget. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Okay, bye.
I thought it was quite valuable talking to Andy to hear about, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to slide in a certain kind of project into operating costs, but then to expand our view as to how you can either get an allocation of budget from a different department or approach your CFO and structure something different and build a case to allow a C-suite, to allow that kind of level to understand this cost differently. Because it's not, oh, we're just going to build a website like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, marketing will do it. It really is an asset, and it actually does depreciate in value over time because of trends happening in industry and sort of our expectations of websites and how that changes. Typically, performance is not the same forever. That's why websites like Amazon or Walmart, et cetera, are always evolving. The design is evolving, how we interact with it from an e-commerce perspective. And a lot of the times when you need all of this underlying technology, when you need an e-commerce capability, when you need marketing automation and CRM, I mean, now we're getting into potentially multi-million-dollar, multi-year kind of deals. And so, of course, that's not going to fall under marketing ops. So I think when we look at costs, when we look at budget, and speaking with Andy, it is important to consider the broader context, start having these conversations with a CFO and try to empathize and understand how they would approach a challenge. Hey, how would you approach this challenge? We really need this thing. Here's the business case for it. Let's talk about it. Depends on your organization and how those approvals and things happen. Because obviously in a private, smaller company, it's a little bit different than large public. But these are the things that we glean from that episode that I think are quite valuable for marketers to consider and think about.
Yeah. What I like about it is that it's such a simple hack. It's simple. You're like, oh, just get the money from somewhere else. And just thinking about it a little bit differently can make a huge difference, especially if you have a web project coming up and you're like, well, I still have to advertise. Like I still, we're rebranding, it's such a simple thing that hopefully that organizations can benefit from, and just by putting a different lens on it.
And here's another spin. If you're on the client side, so maybe you're working for a brand right now, you can ask vendors or you can ask your partners like an agency for different models to pay for things. Like I know there's an openness for agencies to restructure how costs and things are distributed. Like if they're saying it's going to cost $150,000, like, hey, is there any other ways we can break this up into phases? Is there any other ways we can perhaps like pre-bill for the next year, and different ways of doing things just to allow some flexibility? And generally there's an appetite on both sides, because if you truly need it, if that asset is truly needed to move the needle, you should find a way to get it done.
Yeah.
And sometimes that requires restructuring how you look at the money side.
It's very smart. I like what you just said. I have no ads. I wanted to ask you, I don't think this is valuable. Do you think it's valuable to say, like, these are the areas where you can actually probably find more money, and these are the areas where you probably won't? Like, I'm thinking like paid media. If you need more budget for paid media, yeah, maybe there's a restructuring thing that can happen, but it's like the cost is the cost. Where, like, yeah, for websites, you actually might be.
In my experience, you'll get no money trying to take it out of media budget. It's very, that the media is fairly fixed. There's not a lot of like, hey, why don't we just like cut our media spend by a couple $100,000 and we'll put it into this other project. I don't see a lot of movement there. I see it coming from other places, and I'm sure Google's like, yes, thank goodness.
So
Media won't be changed. I mean, of course there are things year over year, but just to like hack media budget down is generally not the first thing to be cut.
right. In your mind,
Yeah.
if you can't move the media budget, it is what it is. Especially smaller brands are like, okay, well, I don't actually have this media budget. It's fixed. It is what it is, but I need reach. What's the best idea?
Yeah, my fully transparent opinion on this is that for some reason, it's hard for marketing teams or directors or executives in marketing to truly prioritize things and decide where cuts should come from or where shifts should come from in order to sacrifice some things to get other things. It seems to me that it's all focused on this 30, 60, 90-day window of hitting certain numbers. And if we're not going to do that, I don't care about your idea. And I think there should just be a little more critical thinking around budgets. I do think sometimes it is the right decision to take a few dollars from media. I absolutely think. But it's generally, it just never gets shifted.
And in your mind, take it from where and put it where? Take it from media, if that happens.
Depends.
Where in your mind?
Yeah, it depends on the strategy.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it is unfair to isolate channels and isolate areas of marketing and say, this is what the impact is going to be. It's never that clear cut. And you can make a lot of projections and nice spreadsheets and do some data analysis and put some impressive things together, but it's just not as clear as extract 100,000 from your media budget, put it there, and here's the net effect. Here's what's going to happen.
Right.
I wish it was that predictable. It is not that predictable.
Right. And I wonder if it feels like the smartest thing is to put it in paid media, because paid media of all of the activities seems to be the most predictable. Like, there seems to be, I'm not saying it's 100% with 100% accuracy, but I mean, like, there are models, and like, it's like, okay, if I put these dollars in around these keywords, most likely this will be the output. Like, we don't have that with social, right? It's sort of like, I mean, over time, and you never know what's going to go viral, and like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll leave this as my note in sort of budget financial world, which is allow yourself to experiment more than you are today, and allow your budgets to reflect that and actually treat it that way, and allow some freedom to screw some stuff up without sort of putting the marketing team at risk of lighting them on fire if something doesn't go right. Like, right. It is naive to think that we're going to achieve the results we want when marketing is just advancing so quickly in terms of where attention is going, where the results are coming from, where future results come from. Are we testing enough assets? Are we testing enough creative ideas? It's just, to say that we've set now a 12 or 24 month strategy is just crap. Like, it just moves too quick. Like, you can have a general concept of where you want to go, but to just lay out every detail and forecast 18 months, this is like what that month is going to look like, it's just bananas. It's crazy. And so I just think allocation of resources and time and effort, it could be rethought how we do this.
I feel like with that last comment, there's like some squirming in seats being like, we have the next 18 months, like calendar.
Totally. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's a waste of time. That's exactly what
Well-
I'm saying, is that your 18-month, like, here's where we're going to be.
Hold it loosely.
Yeah. As fast as TikTok can become the primary attention platform, and you have no participation in that platform today as a brand, and I'm speaking to a lot of brands, it's shocking and appalling from a marketing team execution. And so what happened? Perhaps the strategy was set too far in advance with limited flexibility, and now you're actually just, you think you're being super effective with all your media spend and everything you have, when you should actually just have some more flexibility and resource allocation to leverage that platform and do it in the right way.
I love that. Great idea. Also, I feel like you've just entered Humanology on Air as like this like renegade, this marketing maverick.
So fun.
So fun. All right. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope there's been something in here that you feel like you can kind of grab onto and think about and be like, okay, maybe I could change this and make my life a little bit easier, make the plan a little bit smoother. And yeah, make sure you join us next month. It's just actually also, it's going to be me and my pal Josiah.
I heard just in there. Just going to be us. I think it's going to be amazing.
It's going to be so
Yes.
great. We're going to do a marketing news roundup.
And it's going to be great because you can bring it back to your teams, bring some of this, our thinking and ideas. You can steal our ideas. Sound really smart because you're like right up on what's happening, right? I think it's going to be.
It'll be so fun. I'm laughing at you'll sound smart because they'll take our ideas.
Oh,
I'm selling us short. We're going to do a great job. Anyway,
We
join
will.
us.
Ciao.
Thanks for coming.